Rain poured as she stood on the porch, soaked through, watching him stitch canvas in the backlot. Silent, distant. A truck unloaded forgotten relics of her life. Her mother's phonograph, old quilts, letters. On one box, a note stopped her cold. This house should be full of things that remember you, not of fences made for strangers. She thought she'd lost him forever, until that moment shattered everything. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The day Tommy asked June Avery to marry him, the sky was the color of old denim, cloud-worn and sun-faded. She sat on her porch swing, shawl draped over narrow shoulders, a teacup cupped gently in both hands. The porch boards creaked with memory. A life lived in layers. Her eyes, sharp as cracked flint, watched him approach like a hawk watches a rabbit, but without hunger. Just bone-deep weariness stitched with curiosity. He didn't kneel because it was romantic. He knelt because that's what a man did when offering what little he had. And all Tommy had was himself, sun-leathered, soft-spoken, and scarred in the quiet places no one could see. He removed his hat, thumbed the brim, and said, "I'd be honored if you'd be my wife." June didn't answer right away. She didn't scoff either. She simply looked at him, a long, deliberate gaze that weighed more than a courtroom verdict. He didn't blink. That was the moment she saw it. Not lust, not calculation, just stillness. The kind only a man learns after losing things he'd never get back. "You're 32, she finally said. "I got boots older than that." He shrugged. "Boots can still walk, even if they're worn right through." A silence stretched between them. The swing creaked. Her tea cooled. Somewhere beyond the fields, a windmill turned lazy circles, complaining like it always did when it had something to say but no one to listen. When she finally nodded, it was so slight a gesture it could have been missed, but Tommy saw it, and he stood like a man rising from prayer, not conquest. They married 3 days later. No church, no organ, just the low hum of cicadas and a county clerk with sunburn on his neck. The townsfolk gathered, not out of affection, but out of hunger for scandal. June wore a dress the color of moonlight on cornflowers, simple, elegant, unashamed. Tommy wore his cleanest shirt and boots freshly oiled. He didn't speak during the vows. He just held her hand like it was something sacred, like he knew he had no right to it, but was thankful all the same. And when she said, "I do," there wasn't a tremor in her voice, but there was a crack in the world around them, the kind that lets the truth in, or lets the past out. Tommy read the words again, slower this time, as if they might rearrange themselves into something kinder, but the ink didn't smudge, and the meaning didn't soften. June Avery, the woman he'd laid his name beside, had looked into his silence and read deception. The will was legal, notarized, cruel in its elegance. Every inch of soil he had walked beside her on, every fence post he had leaned against with quiet hope, destined for someone who hadn't stepped foot on the ranch since Bush Sr. was in office. He folded the letter twice, then once more, until it fit like a blade between his fingers. The barn swallowed the sound of his breath, thick and dry in his chest. His mule shifted in the stall beside him, as if sensing the shift in air. Outside, the wind dragged along the eaves like a broom sweeping away the last dust of belief. It wasn't the land he mourned. It was the look in her eyes when she'd handed him that letter. Not defiant, not even ashamed, just distant, like a woman watching a river carry off something she once tried to save but had given up on. He had seen that look before, in his mother's eyes when his father hadn't come home one night and never sent word. It was the look of a heart that had learned not to hope too loud. He spent the day splitting kindling, hands blistering through gloves. He hammered new iron shoes on the mule, though it didn't need them. Every blow of the mallet was a word he didn't say. "Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you trust me?" The sun dipped, setting the fields on fire in orange and gold. Tommy didn't watch. He worked by the flicker of a single lantern, shadows growing long like regrets. And when night came, he lay on the hayloft with only the mule's breath and the ticking quiet to keep him company. He didn't cry. He never did. But his chest ached with a weight that couldn't be lifted with muscle or will. She hadn't seen him. Not truly. And the worst part wasn't the insult. It was how much it hurt to still love her after it. Tommy rode with his back straight, eyes set forward, the way he did when breaking in a horse. Calm on the outside, but keeping fury reined in tight. The morning wind tugged at his coat, and the rhythmic clop of his gelding's hooves was the only sound as he passed through Three Crows. Folks watched from porches, half hidden behind newspapers and drawn curtains. Not one of them waved. Not one dared speak his name. In their eyes, he was either a fool or a gold-digging ghost, stripped of pride, stripped of home. He didn't stop at the saloon or the diner. He didn't glance at the church bell swaying in the breeze. He rode straight to the lawyer's office at the edge of Maine, where the clapboard walls still bore scorch marks from a long-forgotten fire. Mr. Killian, a man as brittle as the legal books that lined his shelves, met him at the door. "I need to make a change," Tommy said, voice quiet, stripped of all anger. "Your will?" Killian asked, arching a brow. Tommy gave a slow nod. What they discussed, no one knew. The papers were drawn, signed, sealed with the kind of finality that didn't need ceremony. When he left, there was a different stillness to him. Not emptiness, but resolve. The kind forged in the bones of a man who's been burned and refuses to pass the flame. He rented a small shack near the rail yard. The walls were thin and the roof sighed under every gust of wind, but it was honest shelter. He found work with a builder who didn't ask questions. By day, Tommy hauled beams and strung canvas for weatherproof storage. By night, he stitched tarps by lantern light, hands calloused but steady. He didn't speak of June. Not once. And yet, without fanfare, he sent a letter to Baton Rouge, short, polite, and legal. It simply asked that her niece come collect what had always been hers, in name, not in soul. The rest took time. Arrangements, shipping, quiet acts of restoration carried out with deliberate care. He filled boxes not with bitterness, but with what he believed she should never have lost. The pieces of her that told the truth of who she was, before the land, before the whispers, before the fear of being unloved. When the crates arrived at her porch, it wasn't revenge. It was recognition and a return. The cottonwood behind the house had seen its share of seasons. Droughts that cracked the earth, rains that turned the soil to black syrup, winters that whispered death through every brittle branch. But this spring, it bloomed like it had remembered something sacred. Its wide arms stretched over the meadow like a blessing, scattering down pods that floated like tiny wishes on the wind. Tommy didn't speak much of the past. He let the barn frame rise under his hands, plank by plank, each nail driven with the quiet reverence of a man building something more than shelter. The wood was rough, unvarnished, but it held. He measured with instinct, not ruler, the kind of precision that comes from fixing what's broken for a living. June brought him blackberry pies in tin carriers, still warm, with crusts folded the way her mother taught her before the war. She never lingered, never asked questions, just set them down on the workbench, tucked her shawl tighter, and walked back to the porch where she'd wait with her needlework or the newspaper folded but unread. Some days he brought her books, Pages dog-eared, covers worn from use. He'd set them on the swing beside her with no explanation, and she'd read them like scripture. They spoke little, but when they did, it was never small talk. It was in the weight of glances, the passing of plates, the way his hand lingered an extra beat on hers when she passed him a hammer or a slice of pie. The day she asked him to stay, the wind was soft and full of pollen. Her voice didn't tremble. "If I asked you to stay forever, would you?" He looked up from where he was tightening a hinge on the barn door. Sunlight caught in his eyes, and he smiled, the slow kind that traveled from soul to skin. "I stayed the moment I gave you that hairpin." Their second ceremony wasn't much to speak of. No band, no preacher in robes, just neighbors in their Sunday shirts and children with grass-stained knees. Hand pies lined the long table. Lemon, rhubarb, peach. No one toasted. No one preached. But they watched. Oh, they watched, as Tommy took June's hand and stepped barefoot into the field. She laughed, that rare sound like cracked glass catching light, and they turned beneath the cottonwood, slow and certain, like the earth itself had settled into place. And when dusk fell, and the fireflies blinked their first soft greetings, she leaned in and whispered what he'd never forget. He didn't reply, just pressed his lips to her cheek, reverent and sure. And the sky held still, as if listening.